Hey, Kate Kennedy here, and I'm excited to bring you another video for the Sweet Stamp Shop. Today I'm going to focus on some of my favorite tips and tricks for card making. So let's get started. We're going to make 2 cards today. For the first tip, we are going to use that washi tape. I know that you have a secret stash of washi tape, just like we all do. It's such a fun product. So here is a really simple, fun way to use up some of your favorite patterns. I just picked several about the height of my card front here, and I'm just going to line them up. I just picked patterns that were in the same color family, and some of the washi tapes that I wanted to use were ones that I find a little more difficult to use on layouts or Project Life or something like that because they're a little more, detailed or wild or colorful or whatever you want to call it. So I thought that this would be a really great use for those patterns that I have a little trouble incorporating into some of my other projects. So this is so much easier than pattern paper because all you have to do is flip it over and fold over the corners. It gives you a nice clean finished edge. So I would suggest that if you want your card front to be smaller than your card base, go ahead and cut it that way first. So that way you don't have to, you can have that nice finished edge of the washi tape. So my second tip involves ribbon. And you probably have a lot of ribbon in your stash too, right? So I like to conserve ribbon. I just don't feel like you need to wrap it all the way around the card. And I feel like sometimes when you do wrap it all the way around the card, it's really hard to keep it in place. So I snip the ribbon in half and then I staple it on the back side. You saw me do that. It does 2 things. It keeps it nice and secure, and you also save 3 or 4 inches of your ribbon. So I just think that that's a really fun tip, and it has a couple of different purposes. I then just stick a couple of mini glue dots underneath to make sure you can't see the staples. So for the next part of this card, I'm going to take, this is a new stamp. It will be released in the second part of May, the Happy. It's fabulous. I can't wait for y'all to see it. The second stamp I'm going to use is from Just the Basics, and it just says birthday. So I am going to emboss this in gold embossing powder, and the first time it was not straight. So I'm going to try again, and that time I got it straight. And then I'm going to stamp the Happy over top of it. It just makes a really cute sentiment, and I love the scale of the sizes. And one of my favorite things on cards, I think it gives it a lot of impact, is to combine fonts. A cursive whimsical font with a bold block letter I think looks great. So I'm going to go ahead and heat set this with my embossing gun or heat tool, and then I'm going to cut this into a strip. And I think for a second that I'm going to wrap it around the edges, and I end up kind of folding it over and creasing it, which makes it really easy to wrap around, but it also makes it really easy to do our third tip. And it's going to be a little bit off camera, but what I do is I go ahead and crease those edges, and then I trim down the panel, and then I'm going to gently fold the paper in half and cut a pennant shape on the end. And by doing it them both at the same time, I know that both sides are going to be exactly the same. And then I'm going to use some of this extra strength Tombow glue dot runner because I'm putting it on top of that washi tape and I don't want it to slide around. For a finishing touch, I'm going to take these gold glitter enamel dots from Studio Calico. I love them. I normally work in groups of 3. And that is exactly what I did here. And I'm going to go back in just a minute after I've secured this and add a couple more. So now I'm going to add some dimension to this card panel by placing some foam dots around the perimeter and a couple in the center so it just doesn't dip down. And I have taken a piece of colored cardstock and I've scored it, or I've cut it down to be half a sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper. So, and then I've scored it to make it a 4 1/4 by 5.5 card front. So now I'm just going to add those finishing enamel dots. I think it really fills it in and makes it look complete. And here are some close-ups of this card all finished. I love the way it turned out. I think it is super fun and a great way to use your washi tape. Okay, so now we're going to move on to something fun. We're going to play with some gelatos. So for tip number 4, I want you to apply gesso and allow it to air dry. What this does is it keeps the paper from warping. So now I have a piece of watercolor paper that's been gessoed and completely dry. I'm taking these 3 different colors of Faber-Castell gelatos. One's kind of a fleshy color, the next one's like an apricot, and the third one's like a tangerine. I wanted to create kind of a gradient effect here. So I have just rubbed those straight onto the gessoed watercolor paper, and now I'm just taking a paintbrush, a regular paintbrush with some water, and moving that color around. And you'll see how easily that color moves when on a gessoed surface. And I don't want to blend these too much because I want you to be able to see the 3 different colors. The top one was just a little too light for me, so I added some more. And again, I'm going to let this air dry. You could dry it with your heat gun, but I find that letting it air dry really keeps it nice and flat. I'm going to trim a tiny bit off of each edge of the card panel so it has a nice white edge, and that way you'll be able to see some of the card base. So as you can see there. And that's just a Hero Arts note card. And I'm going to use the same trick with the ribbon as I did for the first card. And I'm going to staple it onto the back, again, for 2 reasons. It keeps it secure, and I save a good bit of ribbon by doing it this way. So I'm just going to tie it into a simple little bow. I really love this ribbon. It's from May Arts, and it's very easy to shape into a real cute bow, and it stays pretty well. I am going to add a couple of glue dots again just to make sure that bow stays nice and tight. And then for the sentiment or greeting on this card, we're going to stamp on vellum. I love to stamp on vellum. And stays on ink, you can emboss on vellum also, which is really cool. But stays on ink I feel like works the best. I'm using the Elegant Sentiment stamp set here. It's one of my favorites. I love this big loopy word cheers. And then I'm going to use the smaller block letter stamp that says here's to you. So I'm just going to cut that out, and while that dries, I'm going to take a look at my card front there, card base, make sure it was scored and cut right. And then I went ahead and cut this into a strip. And again, I'm going to fold it over the edges of the card front. This way you won't see any adhesive because there won't be any adhesive on the front. And since we let that just that gelato panel dry, air dry, it's perfectly flat. If it was warped, it'd be very hard to do this. So you can see I just created like a band around the card. So now I'm gonna put some foam adhesive on here. And here's my next tip, tip number 5, is to use your leftover packaging or the negative space of the foam dots. It's perfect for these kind of card front panels because it covers it entirely and you don't end up using a whole ton of foam dots. So I hope you've enjoyed these tips and tricks. And here is a close-up of this card. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you again real soon.